All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Roman Polachenko. I am an assurance manager at SBP, and I will be conducting this follow-up SBP RED II webinar. This is a follow-up webinar from what we did previously this year in February. At that time, we just received a technical positive assessment from the Commission, and we have also published draft documents for RED II, and we wanted to give you first impressions how our scheme will deal with the RED II. So this webinar is to follow up what has happened since then, and also what is our steps going forward. So I will launch my presentation. Basically, there are some people still joining. We have over 100 people who have registered for the webinar, so I will not rush through the slides and wait for maybe 1-2 more minutes. But this webinar is also being recorded and it will be published on our website, so whoever is couldn't join or joining later can watch it again. Let's go through the agenda of the webinar, and I'll present what we are going to talk today. So there is 2 parts in the webinar. Part 1 is the presentation, the PowerPoint, which I will be doing for the first hour approximately, and then there is part 2, a discussion, the session of questions and answers, where we will open the chat function. We will welcome your questions, so you can type your questions in the chat box, and we'll be taking them one by one. If we won't be able to respond to some of the questions today, we will make note and then come back to you later. So in the presentation part, we are going to give you some information on the RED II in general. For many of you, I assume it will be rather repetition, but there may be some people who are not so familiar with the concept. So we will give you some very brief details on that. I will provide information on application timeline. So here we are basically, we'll present you our path towards the recognition so far, what we have done, what were the steps, and what are the additional steps which we will need to take in the future. We will then present some different versions of our documentation. I will also explain why there are different versions, different stages of our recognition, and there are certain documents which we are about to publish, and there will be new versions later this year and early next year. We will go into the details of the documents. Of course, this 1-hour webinar has certain limits, how much we can go into details. We will, of course, not take every clause of the requirements, but we will provide rather detailed summary. And you can always, in the future, you can contact the Secretariat, or you can contact your certification body for more clarifications. I will give you some practical advice on how to add these requirements to your certificate scope. So there will be steps to be taken by the certification bodies and by certificate holders. And then also I will just mark a couple of points of attention, some concerns, some additional activities we are going to take in the future. So let's then start from the RED II requirements. And as I said, most of this text is, of course, a repetition, but it's probably useful to remind ourselves that the directive itself was published already quite a few years back. The aim was to develop the common biomass sustainability criteria across EU. So in every member state, it is possible to demonstrate sustainability of biomass in the same way. Of course, the directive is about renewable energy. It's not about just biomass. Biomass is rather like a small part of this document, and it has been the kind of biomass has been woody biomass added to the RED in this second version. When it comes to SBP, what is important is the biomass. We are not working with biofuels or gases. We're just working with woody biomass and also biomass from processing agricultural industries. This is where we are actually exploring new products to be included. When it comes to sustainability criteria, it is divided into, let's say, kind of three major topics: so harvesting requirements, LULUCF requirements, and greenhouse gas emission saving requirements. The compliance with the directive can be demonstrated through several ways. One way is to use national schemes set up by the member states. According to our knowledge, there is one scheme established in Austria. There are a few other member states who are interested in that and exploring this option. But what is, again, more important when it comes to SBP is voluntary schemes, which have been recognized by the Commission, European Commission. So the operators, users of biomass, they can use one of those recognized voluntary schemes to demonstrate compliance. When it comes to applying the requirements for forest biomass, risk-based approach is proposed. This is the concept which is familiar to many of you from other voluntary certification schemes, like, for example, FSC or PFC, also EUTR. Other name for that would be due diligence process. Then the RED has exemption from sustainability requirements for processing residues and waste. And the model for accounting of the material is so-called mass balance model. When I come later in the presentation, when I come to the technical requirements, I will mention those requirements in details, what each of those points actually mean. When it comes to sustainability requirements, we have sustainable harvesting and LULUCF. Sustainable harvesting includes, let's say, 5 different components. There is a lot of different normative texts, but we can combine them into those five topics. Is wood legality, regeneration of the harvested areas, nature protection, soil quality, biodiversity, and then long-term production capacity of the forest. Most of these requirements are indirectly covered through SBP Standard 1. However, in RED II, there is quite specific terminology used, some specific language, so some of the requirements are not like exactly the same. When it comes to LULUCF, it talks about basically trying to keep the balance between forest carbon stock and sink, and like depletion of carbon sink. There are different paths how to achieve and how to demonstrate it. We will also see in further slides different so-called levels, level A, level B, how to demonstrate compliance. And as I mentioned, for processing residues and waste, there is no sustainability requirements. The only requirement is to actually demonstrate that the material is indeed a processing in a residue or waste. In other words, that this is not primary material from the forest being sold as processing residue, but it is actually processing residues. There are certain steps which operators may need to take to demonstrate that. So these are the sustainability requirements for when it comes to woody biomass, relevant for our scheme. And next, I would like to mention how did we apply for the recognition, what were the stages of the recognition, what is still waiting ahead, and also what was the process of integrating RED II requirements into the SBP normative framework. So initially we applied for recognition in October 2020, quite some time ago. And for us, it was the first time. So our scheme wasn't recognized under the RED I. Our scheme has been established over 5 years ago. At that time, there were no considerations for RED, and the scheme over time became a pretty kind of pretty strong established certification scheme This all had quite significant consequences on how did we implement the RED II requirements. So the scheme wasn't tuned or developed initially with RED in mind, and we had to adapt already established, quite widely used scheme to the RED II requirements. After working in 2020 and 2021, on 2nd of December last year, we received so-called preliminary positive assessment from the European Commission, which meant that our documents were technically correct. At that time, it was kind of, we received a green light for our scheme documentation, but then some steps had to be taken, including formal decisions by committees, and also translating of the decision into all the EU member state languages. There was several meetings, then there was a holiday season, and eventually, after all these formal steps have been completed, on 26th of September, we have received official recognition from the European Commission. So if one goes to the official website, you can see our scheme among the approved certification schemes in the list of approved schemes. If you look at the screenshot, you'll see that there is no link for our scheme. This just demonstrates that we are a new scheme, new for RED, so we haven't had this obligation to provide annual report. And with the first annual report, we will need to compose at the end of this year for 2022. How are we building RED II into our normative framework? So after a lot of analysis, a lot of discussions with the Commission and their consultants, we realized that the only viable option was to develop an add-on to the current normative documents. As I explained, our system is already used by the industry for many years. We have a set of our standards, a lot of different technical platforms and documents, and it was pretty impossible task to integrate RED II directly into our normative framework, into our standards. That's why the decision has been taken to work through the add-ons. We call these documents instruction documents, to complement, to kind of build on top of existing documents. Our recognition of 26th of September, the formal recognition now is for the current, or can we also call it legacy version of normative framework, meaning that those of you who are working with SBP, you are well aware that we are in the process of revising our standards. We are getting closer and closer to the revised standards being published, hopefully early next year. And but when we applied back in 2020 and did all the work in 2021, at that time we could only work on top of the existing standards, current standards. That's why our formal recognition is currently linked to the current legacy version of SBP standards. We call this version of RED II version 1. For your information, it's also good to know is that this add-on will be mandatory when used with the revised standards. So once we have revised standards published, currently projected early next year, then when companies will start using new standards, it will be mandatory to also comply with the RED II requirements. So basically to use those instruction documents, the package of documents, so that every time one makes a SBP claim, compliant or controlled claim, it also needs to be RED II compliant, regardless whether the biomass is being sold to EU market or not, or regardless if customer is asking for this or not. The rationale for that is to make SBP biomass fungible. So if anything happens at the time of transportation logistics, if customer needs to be changed, then the material can be redirected easily to other customer or other market and still be RED II compliant. Important to mention is also that the RED II add-on is complementary to the main SBP normative framework and may not be used as standalone certification criteria. It means that it's not possible to just take RED II documents, SBP RED II instruction documents and additional documents, and certify just based on that. When you use our scheme, first of all, you need to use SBP standards. We have 6 standards and a number of normative interpretations, number of instruction documents. So all of this needs to be used, depending on your scope, of course. And RED II add-on is complementary. With revised standards, as I said, it's going to be mandatory, but it is not standalone. It cannot be used alone. It needs to always be used together with the SBP normative framework. So the draft SBP RED II version 1, this add-on was published back in February. At that time, it wasn't yet clear whether stakeholders, certificate holders do they need to start using it. We were also waiting for a number of implementing regulation to be published, and that required us to update our documentation. That's why decision has been made to wait with the publication of valid documents, so not to make them effective, and publish just drafts for information purposes. However, things have changed. There are a number of stakeholders, certificate holders, who express interest to add it to their scope to be able to use SBP scheme for compliance with RED II. And we have taken a decision to release these documents, basically to publish those drafts as active documents later this year. Currently, the timeline which is expected is 11th of November. So by that time, we are going to publish all documents as active documents and also make adjustments, necessary adjustments in our systems, including audit portal, DTS, and so on. When it comes to documentation, there is a number of documents which had to be developed or adjusted. So the main key document is called Instruction Document RED II, Bridging Requirements for Meeting RED II. So this is where we use word bridging, where we are basically connecting RED II requirements and SBP requirements. This document, I will go into details later in my slides. What are the content, but it includes, basically everything what was required by the European Commission during the recognition process. Then there is a separate document, Instruction Document 6D. This instruction document is placed under Standard 6, and this would be used by end users who need to calculate the emissions, need to calculate emission savings, and they need to do it under the RED II requirements. At the moment, in SBP scheme, none of the certificate holders use Standard 6. However, this may change. If end users, certificate holders need to demonstrate not just calculation, but certified calculation, then this instruction document may be used. There are a number of additional documents which had to be developed, like certification body audit report checklist. This is confidential report template, which needs to be used by certification bodies during their audit. Document which is not published, it's not part of the public summary report, but which can be used or shall be used during the audit. It includes documenting findings when assessing RED II requirements. Then there were some requirements, requirements included in our documents like SAR, SBR, supply-based report, public summary report, which are all integrated in audit portal today. So there were changes, minor updates to accommodate requirements from RED II. And then, of course, like our main tool, DTS, data transfer system, this is where we ensure our traceability and credibility of all the transactions, all the SBP claims. There we had, similarly to what we already have for Dutch scheme SD Plus or claims in Flanders, we are going to implement RED II claim functionality. So every time company is making SBP transaction, if they have RED II in scope, they can also check the box and demonstrate RED II compliance. The next one I would like to present different versions. This is where it gets a little bit confusing, but bear with me because this is very important. And the reason why we have potentially a number of different versions is that, as I described, we started with the current standards back in 2020. Our current version was approved in December 2021. Documents are planned to be published in November. But what happened since our approval is that in late spring, Commission has published implementing regulation on rules for voluntary schemes. And schemes were required to update their RED II documentation and submit it again for review. And then later, in September, another implementing regulation was published, and this one was on the requirements, sustainability criteria for forest biomass. So that meant that we had to update our submitted documentation, our RED II region requirements for additional review. So the version which we have currently approved by the Commission is called version 1.0. And there is two more versions, 2.1 and 2.2, which are currently being reviewed by the Commission. We have received just last weekend, we received assessment report. There is a number of requirements where we need to amend them a little bit, provide additional clarifications. And it is expected that by the end of this year, we should be able to adjust or revise our RED II requirements, our RED II documentation to be also covering implementing regulations. So those who are in hurry and need to add RED II requirements already now, they will be using version 1, which is approved by the Commission and going to be published in November. But then a few months later, we expect to be able to publish updated version. We will not probably publish version 2.1, but rather version 2.2, and this will be also available for use. And eventually, what will happen is that once we have our revised standards published, probably early next year, we will need to resubmit our region documents, RED II documents to the Commission, so that we can link RED II requirements, basically region RED II requirements version 2.2 with the new standards. We expect this to be a relatively straightforward exercise, but it will require another process where Commission and their consultants will need to review, assess our submission and give us an approval. So that's about the versions. A little bit complicated, but yeah, hopefully you will manage to follow what I'm explaining. So just to recap the process, there are two major implementing scenarios. The first step scenario is called legacy standard plus RED II bridging ID. So this is what we are doing now. And this legacy scenario is divided into two sub-scenarios. Legacy standards with RED II bridging ID version 1 and then version 2. So the version 1 will be effective. Currently projected date is 11th of November. And version 2, this is what I just explained in the previous slide, will be effective as soon as European Commission and their consultant Guidehouse approval is given, plus time needed to adjust our systems. Estimated end of 2022. So then we'll be able to publish a second version. The changes between or difference between version 1 and version 2 will not be dramatic. So the companies will just need to adjust their procedures, adjust some of the systems. And the second scenario will be called revised standards plus RED II bridging ID version 3. So this is, as I explained, when we will publish our revised standards, and we will need to submit it to the Commission for reapproval. We will reconnect or bridge RED II requirements again with the revised requirements of SBP, and then we will of course need to get the formal approval for that. Next, I would like to provide you some details, go into the region requirements. And first of all, the main document, as I explained, is ID RED II region requirements for meeting RED II. So this is our process, how we connect RED II and SBP. In this document, we are defining the scope of the scheme, RED II scheme. We link definitions because the Commission text, they used different definitions, slightly different language. So we had to connect, especially when it comes to existing standards, which are not so easy to change. We had to connect them and explain that this SBP definition means this definition in RED II. Then document also includes description of SBP internal processes related to the management of this scheme, of the scope, which is applicable to our secretariat. This is what we as a secretariat needs to do when we communicate with the member states, with the Commission, when we monitor the process, ensure oversight and accreditation and so on. Then there are requirements on sustainability criteria separately for sustainable harvest and WCF, some requirements on waste and residues separately. Then there is mass balance requirements, additional accreditation requirements for certification by these bodies, and then there are a few tens of pages on annexes. These annexes particularly explain how to apply risk-based approach with 2 levels for complying with sustainability criteria. The document itself, the region ID, is relatively long. It was quite difficult process to obtain the recognition, in a sense that we as a scheme secretariat had to work under quite direct instructions from the Commission, what needs to be included, what level of details included in the region document. So we ended up with a quite long document. Then on this slide, it may feel a little bit overwhelming, I can imagine. However, I hope that most of you who work with our scheme will understand and find it useful. So here I try to basically highlight the differences, like differences in different versions, differences in different, basically like versions of our normative document. So on the top, you have columns for legacy standards, the current standard, then the revised standards, which are being revised currently and which will be published early next year. Then we have RED II region ID version 1 and then RED II region ID version 2 and 3. And then on the left, we have different topics of the requirements, like major. Of course, it's not a complete list of all the requirements, but these are highlights, the important requirements where there may be like some major differences between how we do things, we used to do things in SBP, and how we should do things under RED II. So we have requirements for the regional risk assessment. So it's important difference is that how we do assessing the risk. So in case of legacy standards, SBP legacy standards, regional risk assessment is mandatory only when it's available. And today we have it only for a number of countries, 3 Baltic countries, Denmark, and 2 provinces in Canada. Same is being planned for the revised standards. So the official regional risk assessment, this is just for those who don't know, this is the risk assessment which is developed by SBP. So this is so-called official risk assessment, which goes through the comprehensive process of development of public consultation. And once it's published, then every operator sourcing from this region or country needs to use it. So it's only available when it exists. One example would be United States, where we do not have it, and then operators are allowed to develop their own risk assessment. However, when it comes to RED, and this is the same, basically the same for versions, RED version 1 or 2 or 3, it's mandatory for organizations choosing level A. So I will get into details about those levels, Those of you who watched webinar in February probably remember what are those levels. Level A is national, subnational legislation, and level B is a sourcing area level. But what is different is that the Commission tells us that level A risk assessment needs to be or shall not be done by the operators, by biomass producers themselves. It can only be done by the international, kind of independent third party, and in our system it would be regional risk assessment. So the scheme itself provides the risk assessment. The fourth, when it comes to sustainability, the next line, we have baseline in our current standard. In revised standard, they are not obviously yet published, but additional requirements expected are strengthened requirements around workers' rights, FPIC, HCVs, forest regeneration, forest carbon. When it comes to the RED, the only requirements compared to the baseline, compared to the current standards, additional requirements would be requirement for forest regeneration, which is important, even though we have still requirements in bridging document, like on sustainable harvest, these requirements are separately, they use slightly different wording. But when we did an analysis, we could find that most of the requirements in RED are properly covered in standard 1, except forest regeneration. So standard 1 doesn't mention, there is no explicit clause that forest needs to be regenerated. This topic is, in our opinion, covered through other requirements, but it's not explicit. So that needs to be added. When it comes to forest carbon, again, we have baseline in the current standard. Then in the revised standards, we will improve requirements. We will have more strengthened requirements on the forest carbon. And when it comes to RED, there are 2 levels, level A and level B. Level A is relatively simple to demonstrate that the region countries, a member of Paris Agreement, have submitted nationally determined contribution reports, and so on and so on. I mean, I will go into details in the next slides on that. So it's rather simple process. In case of no level A risk assessment, level B risk assessment needs to be used, which is more complex. It means that for the sourcing area, the producer needs to do rather sophisticated analysis of some modeling of how forest carbon stock and sink will change over time in the future based on the forecasted forest management. Next topic on the left is approved FM or chain of custody scheme claims. So we have SBP compliant claim in SBP. So when material comes with so-called approved other system claims, which are currently FSC, PFC, SFI, then in the legacy's current standard, it is automatically compliant. When it comes to the new standards, revised standard, this cannot be automatically compliant. It can be used as a risk mitigation. Same with RED. In the RED, those claims, other system claims, are only recognized if the scheme itself is recognized by the European Commission. One example would be the PFC scheme, who is currently in the process of being recognized. So once they get their recognition, PFC claim can potentially be used as for demonstrating RED II compliance in our scheme as well. However, many other schemes, including FSC, have no plans, or let's say they haven't applied for recognition yet, which means that those claims cannot be used automatically and cannot be only be used as risk mitigation. When it comes to processing residues and waste, in our current standard, those claims are approved. So if there is material with FSC or PFC or SFI claim, it automatically becomes compliant. Otherwise, the supplier-based evaluation will need to be used. We preserve the same requirements also in revised standards. So it's probably important for those who are preparing for the new standards to know that for primary material from the forest, we are dropping, or there will be no automatic recognition of other system claims for SBP standard. However, For processing residues, we will do the exercise called benchmarking. And if this exercise shows that FSC and PSC or SFI claims are sufficient, then it is likely that for processing residues, material which is being sourced with those claims will automatically be considered as SBP compliant. When it comes to RED, for processing residues and waste, there is no sustainability requirements. That's important. So this is where there will be a difference. RED doesn't have sustainability requirements. SBP, we ask either for the approved scheme claim or for implementation of supply-based evaluation. Then next topic is material accounting method. So today the method which is being used is so-called credit system. This is again system which we are borrowing from FSC and PSC. However, in the revised standard as well in RED II bridging document, the new system is called mass balance. I will have another slide on that, where we will explain what are the differences, this is kind of one of the major topics where companies will need to do some extra work to switch from the credit system to mass balance system. Next one is accounting period. In the credit system today, both FSC and PFC use 24 months. The new standard, revised standard, will have 12 months. So currently it's 24 months for credit system. In revised standards, it will be 12 months for mass balance. But for RED, there is a difference that there are different accounting periods for primary feedstock, which is 12 months, and for processing residues, waste, and trading activities, it is 3 months. So you can see there is quite some difference. The next one is product group ID. This is a new concept which we introduce in the revised standards, and it will be also introduced later in the RED II region ID version 2 and 3. This is basically this is connected to the next concept, which is production batch ID. We already have it today, and those again familiar with SBP scheme will recognize the kind of the structure of the production batch ID, where the first number demonstrates the CB, then the certificate holder number, then we have so-called SDI or static data identifier or scope endpoint. So this is the moment where ownership is like through the transportation and logistics, ownership of the biomass is given over to the next actor. And then AA, just like it's either 00 or 99, which illustrates whether company is using DBSD, dynamic batch sustainability data functionality, or not. So this is the same, gonna be the same for legacy standards now, standards we have today, and also RED II bridging document version 1. However, in revised standards and also in the next RED II versions, we have updated production batch ID, which will include additional information, including the product group ID and reporting period. I will explain it maybe in more details in further trainings when we start rolling out next version RED II bridging ID, or like the package version 2 and then version 3. And the revised standards, then there will be definitely more sessions where we'll go into details to explain this. But this is, yeah, this just serves as heads up on changes we are planning to make. And then when it comes to non-conformances, there is also one important difference, that in the legacy standard and also in planned revised standards, we have only 2 types of non-conformances, major and minor, while in RED II, there is additional type of non-conformance called critical. So this is important, of course, for both certification bodies and certificate holders, because under certain circumstances, certain violations may result in critical non-conformance, and critical non-conformance may result in or shall result in termination of the certificate. So in this regard, RED II requirements are stricter. When it comes to timing, then we have legacy standards now. Obviously, those who are certified, they use legacy standards. Those who are applying for SBP certification now, again today or until revised standards are published, should use legacy standards. And then we are also planning to publish, as I explained, RED II Bridging ID package version 1 in November. So basically next month. And then currently we are forecasting that we will be able to publish revised standards early next year. And also we will be able to publish RED II Bridging ID version 2 and version 3. I explained previously in some slides back that version 2 is basically version 1 updated based on published implementing regulations, and version 3 will be to connect revised standards with the RED II Bridging IDs. A few words again about the scope. Same information as we had in February. We have basically lignocellulosic, so it's woody material derived from forest and non-forest. We also have processing residues from forest and agriculture-related industries, and then we have woody waste feedstock. The biomass fuels are usually pellets and wood chips. Geographical coverage is global, and chain of custody coverage is full biomass supply chain. I'm just showing like some highlights. So those of you who will feel more interest, or let's say those who will start preparing for adding this RED II into your SBP certificate scope or going through the initial certification, you should of course go and check all the bridging documents or additional documents in details. I'm just highlighting different sections. So we have like another section where we link SBP and RED II definitions. Here you can see just some examples how we do this. Then there is a section in the bridging document called internal processes related to RED II. This section is only applicable to SBP Secretariat. In a sense, of course, where we describe our accreditation model, this would also apply to certification bodies and indirectly to certificate holders, but it just has a number of requirements which are managed and implemented, ensured by the SBP itself. So for other stakeholders, this is rather for information only. And in version 3.0 next year, we are considering taking out these sections just to reduce the size of the bridging document, to take it out into a separate ID document. These procedures include internal monitoring, training program, working with applicants, supervision by member states, and annual reporting to the Commission. So these are the activities and projects which we need to do as a Secretariat, as a scheme. So here again, this slide you probably remember from February webinar. Nothing has changed. We have two subtopics of sustainability criteria: sustainable harvest, Article 29, Section 6, and LULUCF, Article 29, Section 7. There are two levels. Level A is subnational laws, as well as monitoring and enforcement. In case of LULUCF, this includes being part of the Paris Agreement, submitting NDCs which cover LULUCF, or having subnational or national laws regulating LULUCF sector, or else. And this level A can only be kind of developed or can only be implemented through using SBP RRA, Regional Risk Assessment, official SBP risk assessment, or risk assessment published by another recognized scheme. So in absence of those risk assessments, the level B can be used. And this is where the management system is implemented at the forest sourcing area level. So this risk assessment and the process is developed by the biomass producer and shall be audited by the certification body. We have in a bridging document, we have number of annexes, annexes C and D for level B, and annexes E and F for level A. So there is a number of annexes, a lot of detailed guidance information on how to develop, how to do those risk assessments. So a few words about next steps when it comes to sustainability criteria. We will try to prioritize level A risk assessments, starting with LULUCF and covering all key sourcing areas. Those of you who have managed to check the requirements, you have noticed that level A, particularly for LULUCF, is much more easier than level B, and we feel that it should be possible for us to do it on the central level, and by the end of this year or early next year to publish level A risk assessment for LULUCF. So this process will need to follow our regional risk assessment procedure. Then RED II level A risk assessment, also including sustainable harvest, will be added to the existing SBP RRAs during the revision. So together with revising standards, we will also need to revise RRAs, which we have currently for Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Denmark, and 2 provinces of Canada. So this will need to be revised, and we will, into our regular SBP RRA, we will put an add-on covering RED II level A risk assessment. And then independent third parties may develop level A risk assessment, and SBP may use level A risk assessment developed by other schemes. One example would be level A risk assessment for Germany, developed by the scheme SURE. So we recognize, of course, level A risk assessment developed by other recognized schemes, and in those countries, and we are aware that there is some interest currently in Germany, where companies are interested in adding this to their scope, so they can use this official risk assessment. Section 7 in the document, just a very simple slide, demonstrate what are the requirements for waste and residues. No sustainability requirements. However, there are requirements which describe how the status of the feedstock, being residue or waste, needs to be demonstrated. And there are certain steps to be taken: recording the purchase transaction, validating suppliers, monitoring of the suppliers, and then inspecting material upon receipt visually through remote auditing, through documentation. If it is not possible through remote verification to confirm that material is residue or waste, then supplier audit program may need to be implemented. And then eventually material needs to be verified as processing residue or waste. And then particularly for RED II requirements, sustainability requirements don't apply. However, it's important to remember that RED II add-on is complementary. So even though RED II doesn't have any sustainability requirements for processing residues and waste, there are still requirements from SBP Standard 2 on what needs to be done when it comes to secondary and tertiary feedstock. So that shall not be forgotten, even though, again, RED II doesn't have strict requirements. SBP itself does have additional requirements which go beyond RED II requirements. The mass balance, quite technical topic. Some highlights needs to be done on the single site level. So those of you who are familiar with FSC system, there's possibility for cross site balancing or accounting. In RED as well, and SBP, we have single site accounting, mass balance period 12 months for primary material, 3 months for secondary, tertiary, and trading. Only balance equivalent to physical stock may be transferred to the next period. This is where in credit system, those of you familiar with FSC or PFC, there is no, so basically the virtually accumulated credits, which can be accumulated over 24 months, do not need to correspond to your physical stock. You can accumulate significantly more virtual credits and keep it for quite a long time. While in mass balance approach modeling, you need to keep the balance. It is possible to go negative, which is not allowed in credit system. It can go negative, but by the end of the balancing period, there first of all needs to be positive balance, and only the balance equivalent to physical stock can be transferred to the next period. So this is quite big difference. However, let's say in those of you who would be interested to use current legacy standards together with RED II, you will need to figure out how to use credit system rules, FSC and PFC, together in parallel with mass balance rules for RED. Probably keeping separate accounting, making sure that you don't do any double counting. However, in revised SBP standards, is particularly standard 4, we are going to align approaches, and new SBP standard 4 will also have mass balance model as a default model. The mass balance implementation guidance will be developed. So we have done some testing during the summer. However, once the first companies will start implementing this document, this technical scope, we will learn more from practice, and eventually we are going to develop additional guidance. We were told by the Commission that there will be some update on implementation of the mass balance timeframe. Some of certificate holders have expressed concerns about this 3 months being too short, especially when working with certain markets where certain types of feedstocks are preferred. For example, processing residues, it's sometimes being hard to accumulate enough physical volume of biomass during 3 months to be able to satisfy those customers. So currently we are working under assumption that this will remain like that. So 12 months for primary and 3 months for processing residues and trading. However, we were told that there will be some update from the Commission. We don't know what does it mean. We are going to wait for this additional guidance, and once it's there, if anything changes, then we will of course inform our stakeholders about that. When making SBP RED II claim in GTS, we are creating a possibility to mark certain boxes, and when making SBP compliant or controlled claim, to also mark if the biomass is RED II compliant. So there will be boxes like RED II compliant, market specific status, country of origin, and whether feedstock is sourced using RED II supply-based evaluation or risk-based approach, or feedstock belongs to secondary or tertiary category. Those of you who work with SD Plus or Flanders claims, that will be something similar. So additional section when you are making the transaction in DTS. Those of you who don't know, SBP has a data transfer system, online cloud-based platform where all certificate holders need to register their transactions so that we can ensure the credibility and that the volumes of kind of input-output volumes match through the whole supply chain. Accreditation requirements, there are some elements on additional requirements on management system of accreditation, how to work with applicants, requirements to audits, and so on. I will not stop here in details. There will be some additional guidance for certification bodies later, particularly next week. There is a CB forum planned where it is in agenda includes also training on RED II requirements. In short, the certification body will need to amend their accreditation procedures, their handbooks, their systems to cover Section 9 from the Bridging document. The next one, I would like to say a few words about collecting energy data and calculating greenhouse gas emission saving. So just this is a screenshot taken from our annual report. Those of you working with SBP knows it quite well. So how do we collect data and transfer data relevant for calculation of greenhouse gas emissions? This data is being captured at the biomass producer level through the so-called SAR report. This data includes feedstock type, origin, power source, different fuels used, like description of drying process, description of biomass storage, transportation details. So all the different elements which are then complemented by additional data on biomass logistics and transportation. So if the biomass producer is selling biomass to trader, for example, and trader has additional legs in the transportation, they can provide additional information on that. So which will result in additional emissions, and then end user collect information on delivery of biomass, all the data to connect it to the supplier, and then data, eventually the data through the transaction batch ID from details data is being collected from supply chain, from traders, and also from biomass producers. So it's possible to plug all this data into the calculator. Different end users have different calculators, and then calculate the emission saving. The SAR report is like one of the kind of major components of this data collection and transfer. This report has been integrated into DTS, so this is currently voluntary to use, and some certificate holders have already started using it in DTS. And then, of course, like why to collect all this information? This is to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions, emission saving. For that, we have a separate document, 50+ pages, which is called Methodology for the Calculation and Certification of Greenhouse Gas Emission Savings for RED II. So those end users who need not to just calculate, but also want to certify their calculation, they can use this document. This is instruction document and under standard 6, and can certify their calculation. Rather technical document, and it uses data from DTS, from the SAR report, from SRED report, to be then plugged into the formula. For those of you who will start using RED II version 1, like let's say the one which we are going to publish in November, the only small change in SAR includes this new section on use of energy and chemicals in forests or plantations for biomass feedstock. So if there is any information which you can collect regarding the harvesting, maybe like how many liters of diesel have been used in logging operations, this section is optional. If information can be collected, it should be provided here. If not, then end users, of course, will need to apply some default values. So when it comes to going through the scope change audit, the SAR report would need to be slightly updated by using this template, which includes this section 2.2. When it comes to next versions, and this is just heads up, again, won't go into details. When we publish RED II version 2 or 3, so there we will start working with the new production batch ID. There will be additional data to collect, data like reporting period, product group ID, and a new definition called downstream transport route. So we'll not stop here, but just heads up that eventually, and this is also included in our revised standards, eventually there will be some updates in the SAR reporting and how to, what information are we going to collect, and that is gonna to improve and make it more precise the communication of data. So we'll also, when receiving a production batch like a transaction, it will be possible to link it to the specific product group ID. Then we have, I planned 1 hour. I will probably go a little bit over this time, and then we open session to questions. But let me give you a few more practical hints or practical steps on how to implement SBP RED II scope, what to do in practice. So for certification body, how to certify, so how to start once we publish everything in November, how to start offering this to your customers. You should participate in SBP training on RED II. This is this webinar, and also we are going to have more details, more discussions during the CB forum next week. You should then update accreditation management systems and tools. As explained, handbook, start using reporting template, confidential template, which we are going to provide. Also update the audit portal, like, start using this reports in audit portal, which will have few additional components on RED II. Then you should inform SBP and accreditation service provider, ANAP, about your plan. You can inform SBP and I can take care of everything else. So we are not asking for accreditation scope change, but we are asking you to inform SBP about your intention to start using this, so that we can then allocate additional support to you. Then you need to register an applicant, and everyone should be familiar. You're using audit portal, similar to when you are extending the scope of existing certificate or creating a new applicant. And then seek support from the secretariat. So basically myself and our team will be there, especially in first stages of implementation, to learn from the practice, from the first audits, and then of course provide all the technical support. Certificate holder, how to prepare. So you need to apply. Those of you who don't want to wait, because there is of course always an option to wait if you are not pushed by your customer or the market. It may be more wise to wait until we publish revised standards early next year, and then, because this will be more aligned with RED II, and then maybe start implementing it in your system next year. However, those who need it already now, you will get access to all the documents, active documents, in November. You should apply for scope change audit to your certification body. You need to think and define feedstock categories, develop and implement the risk assessment against RED II sustainability criteria. So depending what are the sourcing region for forest biomass, like you need to see which level you can use. Is there level A risk assessment available? So official risk assessment, or if it's not, then you may need to use path B, do a risk assessment level B. You need to conduct supplier audits if necessary, supplier audits for suppliers of processing residues or waste. If you cannot do remote verification, you should update documented procedures, update your supply base report, which is currently integrated into audit portal, and there will be a number, like rather small number of additional sections on RED II. Develop mass balance accounting. So if you start using RED II now, you will need to design mass balance system and use it in parallel with credit system of FSC and or PFC. You then do internal training, internal audit, submit relevant documentation, including mass balance procedures, to your certification body, and go through the scope change audit. So this, of course, this list is probably not complete, but this is just to give you an idea where to start. And of course, we assume that initially there won't be like a huge wave of companies who wants to add it. Most of companies, from our understanding, will wait until we publish next version, and especially potentially waiting for the revised standards. But those who need it now can contact your CB or come directly to Secretariat, to SBP, for advice. And then finally, some points of attention. Yes, there is some additional effort to add SBP RED II to the scope. We feel that if you have SBP certificate today, if you implement supply-based evaluation for primary feedstock, or if you buy in processing residues and waste, if you buy it with the claim, then kind of on the ground, we believe that our requirements are very well aligned with RED II, and you should not have any substantial kind of problems, challenges. However, there are certain administrative steps which you will need to take. As I explained, one of the big issues is that the Commission and the RED II directive uses different language, and we were requested to use this language. That's why we had to develop this additional bridge and ID document, and you will need to use the same text terminology and potentially develop additional procedures and processes to satisfy those RED II additional requirements. RED II mass balance requirements are different from credit system requirements, so this is where we expect companies will need to do some additional work as well. So try to, especially at that time, those of you who will try or need to use credit system at FSC or PFC and mass balance for RED II at the same time. So we believe that this should be technically possible. However, it will require some building of the system. Level B LULUCF is quite complicated. So those of you who do not have level A LULUCF risk assessment available, according to our information, there is one in Germany. If you would be sourcing from other country, until we have official level A LULUCF risk assessment, the companies will need to do level B, and that's maybe quite complicated. However, everything is of course doable. It's just a matter of involving competent personnel to do this work. I already said that we'll support stakeholders, certificate holders by developing level A risk assessment. It will just take some time. We cannot promise this to be ready tomorrow, so it will take some time. So quite easy to add to the scope for biomass producers who do not use primary feedstock. So those of you who use processing residues, it should be relatively straightforward. On RED II side, all you need to do is to demonstrate, confirm that material is indeed processing residue, and that's basically it, plus some additional procedural steps. For primary feedstock, the requirements are slightly more sophisticated. And then again, a reminder for those of you who are not going to add it now, just heads up, next year when we have revised standards, when you are going through the scope change, according to the revised standards, the RED II module, the ID documents will also be mandatory, meaning that every claim, SBP compliant or controlled claim, will need to be also RED II compliant. So that leads us to the questions and answers sessions. I would like now to stop sharing my screen, and I will start checking the chat box to see whether there are any questions coming. So please feel free to type your questions in the chat box, and I will be taking them one by one. My colleague Lucas is helping me with those questions if I miss anything, and of course, like, we will keep track of all the questions. If anything is won't be answered, we can do it later. All right. Also, like, if you, so that's exactly, there is a question. So next year one needs to do RED II, but one can use the old standard for 18 months. So it is projected that the transition period for new standards, or we rather call them revised standards. They are not new standards, they are standards which we are revising every 5 years. So revised standards, once they are published, there will be 18 months transition period. So the company has 18 months to start using new standard. So that means that they don't need to be RED II compliant until they are using legacy standard. We understand this is not ideal in a sense, because there will be quite some delay or quite some time until the market will kind of, this SBP claim on the market will also become always like RED II compliant. However, we would leave this up to the market to decide. So we don't want to interrupt the auditing process. We don't want to force companies to do transition before or too fast. I would leave it to the market. So if customers, let's say your customer needed RED II compliant biomass sooner than 18 months, then that means that the certificate holders may need to go through the additional scope change audit. So they will add it they can decide if they, let's say if we publish revised standards Q1 next year, they have annual audit at the same time, they will most likely not be ready to start using revised standards, because one needs to take the new standards, understand new requirements, redesign the systems, and then prepare for the audit. However, they may be already asked by their customers to be RED II compliant. So then they can take these RED II bridging documents. At that time, it will still probably be version RED II version 1 or 2, and apply it for the scope change audit. So they will remain on the legacy current standards, SBP standards, but start using the RED. So we'll this is always like a challenge with the transition. There's we cannot tell everyone that 1st of January, or let's say the next day after we publish documents, revised standards, everyone needs to be compliant. This is quite commonly 18 months is quite commonly used in other systems too. So in some systems, it may be up to 2 years. So we think 18 is rather reasonable. So the next question, can the BP use level B approach and use FSC or PFC as proof there is management system implemented on the sourcing level? I understand that LULUCF might be the issue here. So indeed, frankly, it's not regulated anywhere in RED II requirements whether and how FSC or PFC claims or SFI claims can be used when it comes to RED II. Our assumption is that we could use example of European timber regulation, where the requirements also do not give green light, automatic default green light to the FSC or PFC material, but it is considered appropriate by the industry that those claims can be used as mitigation. So the one will need to demonstrate which specific RED II requirements FSC or PFC claim mitigates. And that's true that probably since FSC and PFC do not currently cover LULUCF requirements, then these requirements will need to be mitigated separately and not by not just by those claims. We will need to think about this and explore a little bit more with the European Commission how those claims can be used as mitigation measure. As I explained, the kind of the formal response is that those claims cannot be automatically considered RED II compliant unless these schemes are recognized themselves. But we believe that those schemes are widely used, they are credible, so they definitely provide certain level of evidence of compliance with certain RED II sustainability criteria. So we'll need to find the way how to integrate it as mitigation. Next question, am I understanding correct that it is not possible currently to apply a RED II module for primary feedstock sourced from countries without the national risk assessment? Or no, it's not correct. So it is possible to apply RED II module, but you need to go for so-called level A. So again, just to maybe repeat, the difference between level A and level B is that level A is when you do the risk assessment on the national and subnational level, usually legislation level or Paris Agreement level for LULUCF, which makes it much more simpler. Particularly LULUCF, most of the sourcing countries will tick the box, and then level B shall not be used. And then also, like when it comes to sustainable harvest, level A is when you review the legislation and then you assess the risk, whether legislation is sufficient to define the low risk. If it's not, then level B needs to be used anyway. But if there is no official level A risk assessment, then we can take any other country rather than Spain today, or sorry, Spain, Germany. Spain just came to my mind because the person asking is from Spain, but there is currently no official level A risk assessment, and level B needs to be used. So I would say that level B would be similar to the supply-based evaluation approach, which is currently described in the SBP standard 2. So that could be used. The next question, on your last slide, you said that from 2023, the RED II new standards, revised standards, will be mandatory for all certificate holders. So this includes traders. Could you briefly explain the main extra requirements for traders? That's a very good question. In terms of traders, the requirements will include mass balance requirements. When it comes to physical stock in the port or harbor, if they apply mixing there, the mass balance should be used. Of course, if there is no physical handling of material, if this is traded without physical possession, then it's kind of mass balance, or rather physical transfer system. So it should be relatively straightforward. The trader should be able to use those RED II claims. So in order for traders, it's always easy because they receive material with SBP claims. So this claim will be also RED II, and then they pass it to their customers. And of course, like that will depend for traders. It will depend to whether their biomass producers have this RED II in their scope. So that's very important. Obviously, that's why we expect that implementation of RED II through the whole SBP system will take probably some time, because every producer will need to add it to their scope if they want to make such claim, and they may have audits at different times. Scope change audits will take, of course, some extra time, but traders will need to speak to their producers, to their suppliers, so that they kind of add it to their scope so they can pass the claim. I don't see any other specific requirements rather than mass balance and making those RED II DTS transactions for traders. It should be quite straightforward. Next question: if wanting to supply RED II compliant material in Q1 2023 from US, would we need to either have an approved scheme RRA in place or have to use level B? Exactly. So that is where the system is different from RED II is different from SBP. In SBP, we have in SBP, the operators, biomass producers can always do their own risk assessment, their own supply-based evaluation when there is no official regional risk assessment. And US is the example of that. However, we received instructions from the Commission that they think that level A risk assessment shall not be developed by the operators themselves. I maybe could mention here that we disagree. As a scheme, as a technical team, we disagree with this interpretation. We will probably talk to the Commission since we find that implementing regulation on forest biomass in particular, it has a text which says that it says that the biomass, it's like economic operator may or shall develop risk assessment on national or subnational level, and then it uses the text that this risk assessment needs to be audited. So in our understanding, this audited is that certification body is auditing it. And it's not just that, but we also have in public summary reports, we have public consultation processes. So we find our process quite robust. However, we have already received additional feedback from the Commission through the assessment report that our interpretation is not accurate, and they still insist that level A risk assessment shall only be developed by the scheme itself or other third parties. So again, by other scheme, for example. So if there would be another scheme developing risk assessments, we could potentially apply them. But when it comes, if we come back to the initial question on US, we haven't heard of these kind of plans. So most likely it will be SBP as a scheme trying to help initially with LULUCF risk assessment level A. And is it realistic to have it by Q1 next year? I think it is. But for LULUCF, the sustainable harvest will probably take slightly more time, but I believe that level B for sustainable harvest is also rather straightforward. Then the next question, there is some text from document. Large clear cuts are minimized except in cases where it is temporarily justified due to documented forest, pests, storms, and other natural disturbances. How is SBP interpreting this, and how will it be reflected in the standard? That's a very good question indeed. So this is text from the latest implementing regulation on forest biomass, which was published just last month in September. I think initially when there was draft implementing regulation, this was using the language that the clear cuts shall be minimized, except the cases where it's kind of justified by local legislation or local practices. Now it has been changed to be much more strict. So again, it shall be minimized except in cases where it's like, pests, storms, or other natural disturbances. However, in many regions, North America, Scandinavia, Baltic countries, clear cuts are quite common. But I think what we will need to develop additional guidance, and again, I'm maybe talking too long, but kind of short response here is that we are thinking about this. We don't yet have our interpretation ready, but I think what we should pay probably attention or focus is the word large. So we need to investigate what large clear cut means, and so like it can mean different things in different regions. I would argue that in Eastern Europe, in Baltic countries, for example, we do not have large clear cuts at all. So in North America, they may be slightly bigger clear cuts, but again, are they large enough to be called large or be problematic or not? So that's to be explored. Potentially that can be, I mean, if the interpretation is very strict, then of course it can potentially have severe consequences. But we will need to spend next weeks or months on getting this answer. Can you give next question? Can you give examples for demonstrating through management systems applicable to the forest sourcing area level as used in level B? So I would say that this is similar to supply-based evaluation. So that the biomass producer would have their own system of sourcing biomass, working with suppliers, like assessing. So there are different systems. Sometimes it's having access to databases to evaluate compliance with legality, talking to different institutions, kind of local authorities, how widely the problem is, doing supplier audits when it comes to kind of kind of risk needs to be evaluated and risk needs to be mitigated through the sourcing process of implementing the sourcing practices, working with suppliers, providing some training, or conducting some field audits. So kind of, it will be kind of different one company to another, from small company to big company, obviously. So like again, I would kind of make a distinction. So the level A is when you don't do anything. You basically evaluate your local legislation, how effective it is. Does it cover all the RED II criteria? Is it well monitored? And if everything is yes, then kind of you don't need to do anything extra. If you don't have level A, or if legislation cannot ensure that, then the company needs to do something extra. And our certificate holders, those who have supply-based evaluation in their scope, should have experience how to deal with that. And then again, that can be very different. Different companies have different tools, different capacities, different competencies, and so on. So it can be quite different. But I mean, again, the guidance which I would recommend to use is the approach which we have in our standard 2, the supply-based evaluation. In bridging document, we also say that the risk-based approach, the risk assessment in RED II is, in our opinion, equivalent to the process of supply-based evaluation. So similar kind of mapping your supply chain, mapping actors, suppliers, working with them, mitigating risks. To clarify, is it assessing risk at each indicator and establishing management controls where needed? Yes, so that would be assessing the risks in absence of level A. You would need to, similar to what we do in when we apply SBP standard 2, for each indicator to try to evaluate the risk. The thing is, unfortunately, we cannot, I mean, in a sense, since we cannot use level A, I would argue that the operator can still describe the legislation. I think it doesn't hurt. It just means that you cannot stop at level A and need to proceed to level B. You cannot just rely on legislation. You need to demonstrate what additional measures you have. And I fully understand that this may not be ideal, kind of because kind of it may be kind of it may be obvious on the legislation level that everything is low risk. So why would you do anything extra? But then we need to think, like, I will write down this question and like give it a little bit more thinking. What would it mean demonstrated through management system applicable to the forest sourcing area level, and try to provide some additional guidance on that in coming weeks to give you a better answer, especially in situation when everything seems to be fine, legislation is in place, it's effective, but the operator is not allowed to use it as a justification, which is odd. I don't want to again criticize what the commission have written or their rules. It's just different from SBP rules, where you can basically stop at any of those levels. If legislation is strong, you stop there. I mean, and we allow companies to do this job. And since everything is in our system, according to our view, is transparent through the consultation, you can go and check the public summary report, supply-based report. You can see what was used as justification. We find this as a credible system. In RED II, you need to go slightly beyond the impartiality of this level A risk assessment. There are stricter rules here. All right. Okay, next question. Is it possible to go for level A to demonstrate compliance with LULUCF and level B for compliance with forest management sustainability? Yes, it is possible. There's nothing what would stop us from doing that. And this is exactly our plan. So we are planning to spend time in coming weeks or by the end of this year to come up with the level A LULUCF risk assessment. Why we are doing that is because, first of all, level B for LULUCF is more sophisticated, especially we find it difficult, may be difficult for smaller companies. And level A is quite straightforward. All we need to do, in simple words, we need to make a list of all relevant sourcing regions. Then we need to verify that every of those regions or countries have signed or participated in the Paris Agreement. They have developed and submitted nationally determined contribution NDC reports. That these reports, they cover LULUCF sector. And our preliminary review demonstrated that most of countries, if not all relevant countries today, would check all these boxes. So what we need to do is to create a relatively straightforward document, do some consultation, and publish it on our website. So that will check the box, and then companies can rely on level A LULUCF risk assessment. But level B, level A for sustainable harvest, if you remember, I showed one of the first slides, there is legality, there is regeneration, there is biodiversity, soil, high conservation values, long-term use of forest resources. So even though these are also not rocket science topics, it would take slightly more time to develop, and especially to develop it for all the different countries. So when it comes to LULUCF, we would go basically to the same website. There is, don't remember by heart, but there are websites where you can find all the information about Paris Agreement and who have participated, who have submitted those reports. Quite straightforward exercise. When it comes to sustainable harvest, we would need to do this risk assessment per each country separately. So we need to go and check again all the legislation for every Baltic country, major relevant countries in Europe. And even though it's not like super difficult, and we are probably gonna take this project later next year, I doubt we can do it so quickly. I doubt we can provide it like in coming weeks or months. All right. We have more time, so feel free to type more questions. Maybe I would like to mention that we are very much interested in what our stakeholders are planning to do with this RED II scope. We have, as I explained, we have received requests from several certificate holders in Europe that they would like to put it under their scope by the end of this year. So they are in hurry. However, these are like around a handful or less companies. So even though we did some survey previously asking companies like, when do you need it and how do you need it, we haven't done it for quite some time. So we are going to probably contact some of you to ask for this, and of course feel free to contact us and inform us about your intentions, your plans, so we have better understanding of the urgency. I find myself personally rather positive that we don't have a wave of companies needing this immediately, and that most of companies, from our understanding, can wait and are waiting for at least the beginning of next year, which will allow us to test the system with a smaller number of certificate holders and make additional guidance or training where necessary. Okay, some question. Will it be possible to receive a summary of the information in French in order to have a reminder for the future? Yes, we will explore. Isabel, if you can contact me through email. We have a French-speaking person on our team, so we will see. We also find France as a key interesting region for us to expand with SBP scheme, and we also understand that sometimes French language works better. So yeah, please contact me separately, and we'll try to find a solution. That's of course doesn't mean that we will do it for every country, but let's see. Yes, we will share. So, as the question about like sharing these slides, we will share. We'll share the recording. We'll probably can also share the PowerPoint if people find it more convenient. We'll see. Yeah, like whether we can publish it on our website or just distribute directly with the participants. No problem. Like regarding publication of documents, so there are certain steps internally which we still need to do. Those draft documents on the website, we need to kind of clean those documents, make them active, or kind of turn them into the valid documents. We also need to do potentially explore internal steps with our technical committee to make sure that everything is approved internally. And then, as I explained, we may need to do some small minor adjustments in audit portal and DTS system so that companies can prepare their supply-based reports, public summary reports for CB and the SAR and DTS transactions. Yeah. So yeah, there is a question like, have you had any questions from VPs in Southeast Asia about having to be RED II compliant when going over to kind of when using revised standards? I don't have immediate answer. Perhaps the question should be asked from my colleagues, perhaps our technical director, Nicola, who is currently visiting mills and doing a lot of different meetings in Asia, in Vietnam. I think he's now in Ho Chi Minh City. It is it's a valid question. There was a lot of discussions around that, whether to do it complementary, whether to do it optional or mandatory. Maybe I mentioned one additional argument for making it mandatory is that when it comes to Southeast Asia, the end user market will probably be Japan, and we are discussing with stakeholders there whether our scheme can be used as to demonstrate evidence of compliance with their new regulation. And they are going, like according to our information understanding, they are going to use a lot of requirements from RED II to build their own system. So we think that RED II and systems used by Japanese regulators will have a lot in common. So maybe eventually there will be no issues there, and the systems will be quite similar. The question is, what is your address, email to contact you? Okay, I will type it here. Okay, yeah, thanks, Lucas. Thank you very much. Will the RED II, next question, will the RED II ID version 1 draft be published as, or are there any edits, clarifications going to be incorporated? Yes, so since we have this version 1, which is currently drafting website approved, formally approved, and version 2 is currently under revision or under review by the Commission, and I think considering the previous experience with them, we shouldn't expect it to come too soon. So my optimistic deadline is actually end of this year to be able to publish version 2. That means that we will need to publish version 1 and make it work. Olivia, you are asking this question, so let's see if you see any particular challenges with that. Please let me know. I know some challenges myself. I know that the version 2 will work much better. However, I find that the version 2 to be at least at the same level of how to say, like practical feasibility as we have documents for SD Plus or Flanders. So even though it's not ideal match between legacy current standard and RED II, I still find that technically it's possible to make it work. And of course, like, yeah, with the new version 2, and then with the revised standards, it will work even better. But that's why for those of you who can wait, it may be wiser to wait for version 2 and then start using that. However, I believe that version 2 can also be implemented. The next question is, has SBP already picked up on some of the rumors around RED III? Yes, we are monitoring the situation, obviously, quite closely through different consultants. However, I will probably not mention anything particular here. Considering the previous experience, usually things move rather slowly, and the transition period is rather long, so we should be able to react quite kind of in timely manner. And once the thing is published, we will adjust our documentation and make sure we are also RED III compliant. But my understanding that it will take still quite some time. In the end of the day, of course, if there will be some additional restrictions on using forest biomass, primary biomass, one needs to understand is that these requirements are coming from the European Commission, and this is not it is not coming through SBP standard development process. So we have our own standards, which we are currently revising. When we revise those standards, we try to make sure that they are not just ambitious, but that they are also feasible, and they correspond to market expectations. When it comes to RED, it's a different, it's a more sophisticated, more political process, and it may result in some additional limitations. But I would prefer not to speculate and wait and see what will be the end version and requirements in RED III. Now everyone has my email, so you can use it to send your follow-up questions. We are trying to provide timely responses. There is a difference, of course, like when you work with your certification body, you can ask for clarifications, but there is obviously the limit how much certification body can help and explain. I would argue that as a scheme we have more right kind of possibility to provide you not consultancy, but to explain requirements without having too many issues with impartiality, because we are not doing assessment ourselves. We are just working. We provide in training. We provide in the explanation of the requirements as much as we can. So feel free to contact us and get if you want to discuss some technical requirements. Also, the version 2 and 3 of our RED II documentation. Once we have version 2, of course, we will plan a training on this as well. So another webinar, maybe shorter, to explain how the versions differ. So that's why today I didn't want to go into details. This webinar serves rather those who wants to get some update, and especially those who need it sooner. Who we have, like as I said, like some companies in pipeline, very few, but still who may need to go through the audit already in November or December. So that's this information from today's session. And once we have more or less final version of 2.2, there will be another update on that, of course. All right. Feels like there is no more questions. That is probably okay if we finish a little bit earlier. As I said, the webinar is being recorded. As last time, it will be published on our website. We will also distribute the PowerPoint presentation to those who have requested. And yeah, basically stay tuned when we publish our documents, official documents for use. I'm assuming there will be another announcement, and then the real work will start. I'm really very much looking forward to companies start using the systems, because this is when companies will come back to us with the questions, and we'll see if there is anything which needs to be updated. The difficult part with when working with EU is that we have we have limited flexibility to change the things. Once documents are approved, they almost need to stay like that, and we will need to be very creative how to provide guidance or fix things going forward, because every time we change or update something, it's not just us and our technical committees, but we also need to go through the EU process. And unfortunately, it's not always super fast. But yeah, we will manage. So thank you very much to everyone who have joined the webinar, and I'm looking forward to receive your follow-up questions, and yeah, stay tuned for more updates from us. Thank you, and I'm closing the webinar. Bye.